Hey, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Backlot 605 podcast. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Casey Kelterman. Join with me on the podcast, as always, is Brian Mensing and Sam Lenz.
Him.
Sam and Brian.
Yes.
They're here.
We are here.
Live from SiouxperCon. Here we are doing the last portion of our film festival. We are so arrogant, we thought we had to save the best for last. Boy, did we make a mistake.
It's always better to end with a whimper than a bang, Casey. That's something that's been said to me before, I think.
Wow, you went there.
Wait, strike that, reverse it.
Nope,
you did this wrong.
You already said it's in the ether.
It's in the ether. Hi, Sioux Falls.
So here on this podcast right now, we are going to be talking about the first movie in our Dracula movie series, which is titled, Dracula from 1931.
That's a stretch.
Starring Bela Lugosi. This is a live version of our new format, which is going to be straight up. We're going to get into the movie right away.
Yeah.
Yes.
No more box office, no more news, no more banter. Well, there's going to be plenty of banter.
But you're going to be talking about Dracula. There'll be banter.
Oh, there'll be plenty of banter. We're talking about Dracula, Todd Browning's classic from 1931. First things first, of course, history with the movie.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's start there. Brian, go ahead. You can go first. Because you maybe have the shortest history.
I have absolutely the shortest history. And the shortest history is today is Sunday when we're recording this, which means it's been 96 hours since I first watched it. Because I watched it on Thursday, if I'm doing my math correctly. So, yes. And that was all. And mind you, watching this movie for the very first time was watching it on a DVD that I have owned since 2000 and Derek can correct 2004. Yep, 2004. I've owned this DVD.
And what is said DVD?
It is it was the bonus DVD in my collector's set of the 2004 smash hit Van Helsing starring Hugh Jackman.
Hell yeah.
Ugh.
Why are we not covering that movie?
I want to know. Hey, when we start talking about Dracula, I'm like, yo, absolutely.
Bonus Patreon episode.
We need to do Van Helsing.
Yes. No.
Casey doesn't have to be on that episode. Brian and I will just gush about Hugh Jackman's wig.
It's so bad.
I love Hugh Jackman's wig in that
It's great.
Thing.
It's fun.
I'm not even sure it's 100% wig because
mania.
he's the kind of guy that would be like, I'm just going to grow that shit out.
Yeah, he's like the commercialized Christian Bale.
So my Van Helsing is why I get an opportunity. And again, as much to Sam's appreciation, I did see that in the theater. So that's one of the reasons why I bought said collector set.
I feel bad for you.
So how about you, Sam?
So I had seen bits and pieces of Dracula throughout my childhood, and I probably watched the whole thing at some point at a young age, because I know my library had the different Universal Monster collections on DVD, and it was like some of the only horror that my local library had because we were very strict, no R-rated, puritanical public library in small town Iowa. So
Iowa explains a lot.
the interesting thing is, like, I hadn't watched Dracula all the way through to my knowledge that I could at least remember well. And so the first time that I really immersed myself in it was about a year ago when we all went to the Dracula Frankenstein double feature at West Mall. Derek was there, you were there, Blake and Andre were there, but you were not.
I was not there. I probably had kids that day.
Yeah. And I remember that was actually one of the first times that I ever hung out with you guys outside of doing podcast stuff. And it was really fun. It's a movie that, even before I'd seen it, I understood the iconography of it. It's like Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, Bela Lugosi's Dracula is a pop culture staple. There's no, you ask anybody, they know who Dracula is, and most of them know who Dracula is because of Bela Lugosi.
It's that image right there when you think of Dracula.
It is very much that image.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, this movie's been part of my lexicon for so long anyways, before I'd even seen it, that it just, I don't know. And, Dwight Fry's Renfield was always something that stuck with me because I'd seen bits and pieces of it. And, so this is a movie that I've loved for years, and really I'm glad to have kind of rediscovered it and revisited it in my adult years because, spoiler alert, I think this movie holds up. I really do. So
I will say real quick here though is that though this may be the first time I've seen this within the last week here, but buying the collector set of Van Helsing, this was one of those reasons because it is one of those iconic movies that
Right.
growing up I know of the movie, I know of the the famous aspect of the what we got going on here, and that's one of the reasons why I did. But like, if I'm gonna buy Van Helsing, Casey, I'm gonna get the classic monster movies that come along with it. So
You can get the good movies that go with it. Yeah. My history with this movie is kind of
Casey
similar.
hates movies.
I do hate all movies.
we're gonna lump him with Casey and Blake hate movies.
Casey and Blake hate movies.
You
That's all
guys
we
should
do.
start a podcast or something.
As if he's not busy enough. My history is kind of similar to Sam's. I didn't grow up with this. When I grew up with like Frankenstein and the Wolfman, Frankenstein especially.
Yeah.
But Dracula was one I didn't get to until I was an adult. I watched it. I think this was beginning of 2020. I was going through all the Universal monster movies. I think leading up to Invisible Man. So I watched all the Draculas, Frankensteins, the Wolfmans, the creatures, everything, the crossovers. So that was the first time I actually watched this movie. All the way
I
through.
know. I listened to the Painful Killer Countdown episode.
It was a painful.
I swore a lot of times listening to that.
Where Van Helsing, I believe, was played
It was.
and did not make the list.
But didn't they replace it with Tom Cruise's The Mummy?
Tom Cruise's,
Which is
The Mummy.
another movie that I will champion. It's not good, but I love watching it.
I like it more than Van Helsing.
Now you have to watch my
But
copy
now
of Mummy.
I've seen Dracula 3 times in the last year and a half. My appreciation for it has fluctuated in that time. Watching it back to back with Frankenstein at that double feature, I was like, this is by far the inferior movie between the two.
Oh, yeah.
Because Frankenstein is, for me, a 5-star classic banger. This was a 3-star movie. But this time watching it, I watched both the Spanish version and the version that has the Philip Glass score.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to kick off our conversation with, holy shit, this movie needs a score.
Mhm.
Because, Brian, I'm assuming the one you have is without a score.
No,
Has
absolutely.
the opening of, what is it, Swan Lake
Swan
at the
Lake,
beginning?
yep.
Pretty much that's it. Yeah, it's a pretty bare boned. I mean, you can clearly tell, this is a 1930s early, cinema type of, film.
Well, I mean, it's the stage play that they just put a camera in front of.
Mhm.
That's essentially what it is.
And you can clearly see that.
Yeah, the action largely happens off screen. What does happen on screen is good, but it does, like, it lacks a certain something when you watch it without the score.
Mhm.
And I think that's just because in horror movies in general, the mood and the tone is so
The score is
important
essential.
that the score is essential to that. The music is what helps build that tone. Like, you think about Halloween, even if it had a different score, let alone not a score at all, would Halloween be the ridiculously influential masterpiece that it is? You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where music plays an integral part to, I mean, any movie, but especially horror.
I would have to agree. I was gonna say is that you have your dramas, your comedies, and everything like that. Your scores, they play a little bit of an aspect of it. I think when it comes to horror movies, all around, regardless of the type of horror movie, is that score is essential because it essentially plays the unseen character of any movie, because it helps build that tension. It helps create the atmosphere, and without it, your movie completely changes the dynamic. You mentioned like Halloween. Halloween, or heck, even like say Friday the 13th, as much as I'm not a fan of that movie, without those, they would be drastically different. They would feel different.
Yeah. I mean, without the rearrangement of Where Is My Mind, Malignant's only like, what, a 4.5-star movie as opposed to a 5-star banger. Score is important, guys. That's what I'm saying.
Score is very important.
Yeah.
Watching it this time, it was almost immediate where I'm like, this is a completely different movie.
Yeah.
Because the movie opens with Renfield and he's about to go to Dracula's castle. And just from that, I was like, there's an ambiance to this now where I'm like dreading him going to Dracula's castle because there's a score underneath it. And then once you get to Dracula's castle, there's the score underneath his reveal and Renfield's interactions with him. And it's like, this should have been included back in the original cut, the 1931 cut, because the horror aspect of this movie, I think, is completely missing without that score, because there's certain scenes in this movie that I think are straight up laughable when there's no score. Like there's the scene where he sees the cross for the first time with Renfield, does the It's like, that doesn't work. That's hilarious without a score, because it's just Bela Lugosi overacting.
Yeah.
But with the score, it's like, okay, now you understand why this character is backing away from this cross. It adds to this dread. It's like, this is maybe this guy's only protection is that, and it's just having that score underneath that adds so much to this movie.
Yeah. That music cue tells you, like you said, the music cue tells you exactly why the cross is such a big deal. One thing that I will say, though, watching the Philip Glass score, there are moments. I like the Philip Glass score. I think it adds to the film, but it also can kind of be a detriment to it because the score is constant throughout the movie. There's not a lot of silent moments. And as much as score adds to ambiance, you also need silent moments without it in order to, punctuate certain things. The fact that the score plays over a lot of Renfield's creepier scenes actually, I feel like, is a detriment to it. Just because Dwight Frye puts on such a good performance, especially the scene where he is crawling across the floor towards the fallen maid, that didn't need a score. That in itself is nightmare fuel of its own. The scene where they find him on the ship and you just hear him giggling didn't need a score. The giggling before they open the door and see his wide-eyed grin staring up at him, that was enough, in my opinion. I like the Philip Glass score. I wish it wasn't as omnipresent in the movie, if that makes sense.
No, I think it makes perfect sense, just for the sake of, as much as a score is important to a film, it's also important to the film to know when to utilize it and when to know, when silence is basically, the silence is golden.
Yep.
You think of other movies like, A Quiet Place and whatnot, to the point where like sound is everything. Again, It kind of goes back to that, especially in horror, where it's that unseen character that sometimes you need to make sure that character is not present at all.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think I kind of agree with that.
Yeah.
Because especially with the Renfield stuff, because I think he, out of all the acting in this, still holds up in 2021. Bela Lugosi, as iconic as he is a bit stage acting in this movie, which isn't a bad thing.
He's coming over from the stage production too, which is a big thing.
And it adds to the iconography of this movie. I think he is the definitive version, obviously, in pop culture, but just kind of the definitive version of Dracula, period. Whenever I think of Dracula, even in all the other movies we're going to talk about this month, I'm still like, well, that's Dracula.
He's the OG.
Everybody else is playing a version of him, even though it's not even the first adaptation of Dracula. But
but he may not be the first adaptation, but he's definitely the one, more or less, that made Dracula mainstream. Bring it up to the theatrical aspect of where someone says, at any point throughout the years where they're like, we're going to make a Dracula movie. They're going back to this just to see where do we pick up on certain things. The required 101 homework is go check out this version of Dracula.
Yep. Well, and I mean, Lugosi is. I think the thing that makes Lugosi stand out among other Draculas is there's a way that he reads his lines. This kind of just unmatched. Like I think more than anything, yes, the look of Bela Lugosi is very iconic. It's a template, but the way he actually speaks and the cadence of his voice, the accent, that is something that has been carried over to everything. I mean, Hotel Transylvania, like you cannot tell me that Adam Sandler is not very much inspired by Bela Lugosi, it's very much that Hungarian accent and the rhythm in which he speaks is very much ingrained in pop culture at this point.
I knew at some point we'd get Hotel Transylvania to pull up somehow into this talk.
I'm not going to talk about Dracula without talking about Hotel Transylvania. You will be hearing about this all 4 weeks on this podcast.
I will say that one of the things that, in terms of the characters that are within this, and going into this being the first time I've seen this, and the kind of the expectation of what I'm used to seeing throughout other versions of.
Because you've seen other Dracula.
I've seen,
movies,
well, like
right?
for instance, like, you know, I attempted to try to read the book for Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I realized that that's a hard book to read.
It's
but
an interesting read.
It's
yeah,
a very
for
interesting
sure.
read.
Sure.
But you know, I've owned and seen that multiple times and whatnot. And going into this here, is the Van Helsing of this, because you think of like the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing, or just Van Helsing's just in general, where they kind of have this like persona about them, and you see Van Helsing in this, and he just looks like a businessman.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I like what's his name? Is it Edward Sloan in this movie? No, I'm thinking of the wrong person. I'm pretty sure, but he's very much charismatic in this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if Van Helsing's portrayal in this movie is necessarily as iconic as the other characters.
Right.
There have been multiple iterations of Van Helsing that, honestly, at this point, like, whether you like the movie or not, a lot of people, when they think Van Helsing now, are automatically thinking of Hugh Jackman, for better or for worse.
Yeah,
like,
there's
just,
in the same instance, the Bela Lugosi here has that look and that aesthetic that people gravitate towards you when they think of somebody like Van Helsing.
They think of steampunk.
They think of steampunk.
Yeah.
They think because again,
I don't know who you guys are talking to. They need to watch some more things
Jackman.
of Van Helsing stuff.
he just has a hate. He's just hating.
It's not a good movie. But Van Helsing in this movie, I think he's a very interesting interpretation of it, because he's not the badass vampire slayer.
Yeah,
Van Helsing.
Right.
He's literally just a doctor who just kind of figures out the mystery throughout the movie.
He just happens to be a doctor who happens to be there.
That just happens to believe in the supernatural, and who also, for some reason or another, like, none of these people believe him, even though all of this weird stuff is happening. It's like, yo, it might sound far-fetched, but like, you also just found someone that was completely bloodless. So,
he's like, hey, look, he wasn't in the reflection. Oh, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like how he's the only one that doesn't see the reflection. He's like, does like 3 takes of like looking into it. Why not call it out there? He lets Dracula escape way too much in this movie to be a badass Van Helsing.
Yeah, because he's not the Van Helsing we know of today. He's the.
They literally he finally convinces everybody midway through the night, and then he's like, "Let's wait until morning to take care of this." It's like, you still got a couple hours a night left. Are you sure you don't want to just try and take care of it now? Like, I know he's more active right now, but he's more active right now.
Van Helsing needed his beauty sleep.
Yeah. It is also, like, I was kind of right. It's Edward Van Sloan. So I was kind of on. There we go. But yeah, I do like Van Helsing in this movie. I just don't think, for whatever reason, Edward Van Sloan's interpretation of this character took off as much as the other ones did. Mm-hmm. But I do believe, I was watching some of the special features on my Dracula Blu-ray, I do believe that he is actually another actor that transferred over from the stage production to this movie.
Which might explain the triple look on the mirror, because he was very animated when he was going through that part.
I know at the very least that Edward Van Sloan was a stage actor.
Yeah. And in terms of the actors that are in this, you can clearly see, especially early on, that you can clearly see who are the ones that went from stage to theater or to film, because they're very much more a vibrant. They're much more animated in comparison to some of the other counterparts, which I do see is a little bit where we run a little bit of issue with this movie, just because some of these people, because they're not filmed, they're not, they came from stage or whatever the case is that some of these people are in 2 different movies because they don't know how to interact with each other, because their dynamics.
Well,
this is still new.
Yeah, film is a fairly new medium at this point, especially people talking in film, and I think too that the stage acting of this movie is very well spoofed in Mel Brooks' Dracula Dead and Loving It. That is a movie where, like, maybe not Mel Brooks' best work, right? But it's very stagey in its performances. It's very over the top. You know, you've got Alex Weber from Wings, who is just like chewing scenery like crazy, as I believe he's Jonathan Harker in the movie. And I do like that aspect of Dracula Dead and Loving It, that it kind of goes back to that 1931 vibe of the actors being very over the top and melodramatic in a almost play type of way, you know?
I love the fact that you're like, not one of his better movies. I'm like, dude, that's still a high bar though.
Oh yeah,
for Mel Brooks.
There's not a Mel Brooks movie that I don't like. I'll level with you guys, but I mean, objectively speaking, Dracula Dead and Loving It is maybe on the lower end of the spectrum of his movies. But like you said, that's also an exceptionally high bar because he's made some stone cold classics, you know? So
back to this Dracula.
Yes, back to this Dracula.
We never deviate.
I want to talk a little bit about, because we're going to talk about 4 different versions of Dracula throughout this month. I think we should at least touch a little bit on like, what are the differences? How is it different than from like the book? I mean, the most accurate adaptation of the book is one that we'll touch on at the end of the month, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is literally has to be with that title. But like the biggest difference here is that when we start the movie, it's not Jonathan Harker going to visit Dracula.
Yep.
It's Renfield.
Yep.
And
which is a decent change. Like it works in the narrative of this movie. Jonathan Harker is almost a side character in this movie. He's really
given nothing.
Yeah, there's not a lot. Whereas like, you know, Dwight Fry's Renfield, he steals the show for me. You know, he should steal the show for everybody. That guy is incredible in this movie. But yeah, I agree. They've changed some things about the book. Whereas like, you know, you even watch the new like Dracula miniseries, and it's Jonathan Harker that goes over to Dracula's castle in the first act. And I think that the way this movie changes that works in its favor, not only from a performance standpoint, but just, you know, makes a little more sense as to why all of a sudden this guy is going crazy and eating flies and bugs. And yeah.
Yeah, I think he is a scene stealer in many ways. I think, again, like I said, he's the actor who's giving the performance that most holds up almost 100 years later now. And I think the changes are good for this movie, because I think back in 1931, this movie is just over an hour long, on the shorter end. And I think changes obviously needed to be made. You kind of had to streamline certain things. You couldn't have the 2-hour plus epic that is the Coppola movie, which we'll talk about eventually. But I think Jonathan Harker, though, I wish they would have given him more to do. Yeah. I think he is pretty much relegated to like 5th, 6th, 7th character in this movie, and you know nothing about him, really.
He's enough right now that even if it's as fresh as it's been that I've seen this movie, I'm like, I'm not even quite sure which person you're talking about in this movie.
Yeah, I couldn't put a face to the name. And I've seen it 3 times in the last year.
Yeah, because I mean, like, for instance, like obviously for Bela Lugosi, for Dracula, for Renfield and whatnot, like you're telling me people like, oh, I can picture these specific figures. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm drawing a blank right now, because obviously to the point where the character is given not much to a point to you don't even have a performance that can be given because there isn't enough work there to be given.
Well, and to be fair, this guy who plays Jonathan Harker, look at who he's sharing scenes with. You know, he's sharing scenes with Bela. He's sharing scenes with Dwight Fry. He's sharing scenes with, and I'm blanking on the actress's name. That's my bad. But the girl who plays Mina, Helen Chandler. Incredible in this movie, especially after the transformation. The scene where she goes to attack him on the balcony she's terrifying in that moment. It's creepy. Her wide-eyed stare as she's just looking at him. You're like, it's so unnerving. And that's one of my favorite camera movements, because it just zooms in on her face. Like it slowly pans in, and you're just like,
it's one of the few camera movements of this movie.
Yeah. And it's very effective, but yes.
And I think that part of that is, like you said, one of the few camera movements, but this is early cinema to the point where they're still trying to get used to, like you said, people talking in movies, you know, very stagnant. There wasn't a lot that they were still learning from that point.
I'll argue against that with the other movie part of that double feature, Frankenstein, because there's so much camera movement that he does. I think it is that they were focused on the stage play. Yeah, just making an adaptation of that they kind of forgot about some of the camera movements. And watching the Spanish version, the introduction to Dracula to Renfield is done so much better, because in this one it's just really just the wide shot and you just see Dracula slowly coming down the street. It's like, all right, come on, pick up the pace. And then meanwhile in the Spanish one, there's like the camera follows up the steps and the camera goes up to Dracula and he's standing there on the steps like midway, and there's the cobwebs behind him and stuff. Like, that's such a great introduction. Unfortunately, the guy who plays Dracula in the Spanish version is not very good. So I think there's an adaptation where you take all three versions of this movie, the one with the score, the Spanish one, and the theatrical, 1931 Lugosi.
Right.
And you have a perfect Dracula movie in there. It's just that there's three different cuts that you have to watch to get to it.
Right.
And that, again, watching it with the score helps with, not noticing. There's not a whole lot of camera movement. It's very static. But watching it without a score, you're like, this is really boring. Why is there no camera movement? There's not a whole lot of action moving on in this movie.
Look at that dog running across the yard, but don't show the dog.
Don't show it. Look, over there. That scene especially is like, we're just listening to a guy saying, look, I see things over there.
Yeah.
We're not going to show you. Don't worry about it.
It wasn't in the budget.
And there's a featurette on my Blu-ray that's called The Road to Dracula, and it's about, 40 minutes of just, essentially talking about the production and everything. The interesting thing I learned from this is that, we knew the Spanish version was shooting simultaneously on the same sets. They were doing the night shoot while the English production was during the day, because at the time they didn't do dubbing. They had to do separate foreign language productions in order to have anything available to play, like in Spanish, right? Well, apparently the crew of the Spanish film would come in, look at the dailies of what the English version shot, and then said, okay, how do we do this but better? Like, that's literally something that they say in the documentary. And so, this is like, unfortunately, the Spanish version, it has a leg up because, well, not unfortunately, but, it does. It has this leg up because they were seeing essentially a rough cut of like, hey, this is kind of how we stage this. And they're able to go, okay, how do we do this to make it more cinematic? How do we do this to make it better, more innovative? And I think that's an interesting concept. Like, if the roles had been reversed, would we be,
well, it's just too
we'd
bad.
Obviously, be watching a different English version and different Spanish version.
I was gonna say, it's too bad though that if that's the case, that it's one of those things that, if you have a good idea, you don't keep it close to the, you don't keep it close to the hip. It's a collaborative effort kind of thing, to the point where it's like, if the Spanish production has went, hey, you know what, we have this idea. Again, it's, like some people modern day, writing, directing a movie or whatever the case is, you're writing a script, you write 10 pages, I write 10 pages. We switched it out. We're making edits and stuff like that. And it's going back and forth. Whereas like if the Spanish, production would have been like, hey, here's what we're doing. We want you to see what we're doing so that you know how to be able to go, forward and whatnot, that what would it have done for this production? Like Casey, you said, the staircase and whatnot. What if they would have been like, oh, well, hey, we've got an extra 5 minutes, whatever. Let's redo this one shot and whatnot. And would have elevated the English version.
There, though, you're going to run into budgetary restraints, time restraints, that type of thing. So I kind of get, like, I don't know. It's interesting because you don't see that anymore because we just dub. Like, you're not shooting two productions of essentially the same script at the same time.
The 15 versions of the Marvel movies.
Yeah, I wish that they would, like, in the documentary, they talk about how multiple productions were doing that at that time, and it would be really interesting to see some of those Spanish productions come through and watch and compare to these English versions of these older movies that don't necessarily have, great reviews. Does that make sense? Yeah. I think it's a really interesting, because it's not collaborative what they were doing. And maybe it was more collaborative than what the documentary let on, but it's very much a, hey, we're going to outdo this movie type of thing. And I haven't watched the Spanish version yet. I didn't get around to it. There's something about, putting on a film festival that takes up a lot of your time. And so, I'm excited to watch it. And I probably will this week, honestly, while I watch the Christopher Lee one that we're doing next week. Just because it's Dracula month, and that's what I'm going to be focused on.
You gotta do something while you're washing your dishes.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't do it while you're washing.
I was about to say, I have to read. I have to
know
read the
Spanish.
subtitles. I can't do dishes while I watch it.
Maria's gonna have to tell you what's happening.
Yeah, I'll just have her translate.
Yeah. But positives for this movie, I think, as far as lack of camera movement, the sets are incredible in this movie.
The sets are
They're
gorgeous.
so good. Dracula's castle is just one of the most impressive sets ever put to film, and the matte paintings look all incredible. Like the look of this movie is just great in terms of that type of production
at that time
side of it.
And unlike the matte paintings in Frankenstein, I was hard pressed to find any wrinkles or folds in these. Not that makes it a better movie, mind you. Frankenstein is an unmitigated classic, but it's just interesting because you're right. It's gorgeous, and it's this blend of like actual sets and matte paintings, and you see this technique even pull through in like movies as recent as Blade Runner in 82, and I probably past that too, but it's a technique that's slowly fading out in favor of green screen, which can look great. We've seen Marvel movies, but they can also look terrible. We've seen Marvel movies, so I think the practical sets are what really make this movie pop. And I wish that more, that's why I'm so excited for Chloe Zhao's The Eternals, because it is a big budget spectacle movie that's shot on location for at least most of it, and I wish more film productions would do stuff like that.
Honestly, I mean, not to get off topic and whatnot, but I think that depending on the success of the Eternals, they're going to see stuff like that. And I think we're going to see more and stuff like that.
I sure hope so, because this movie is very much an argument in favor of practical sets.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Derek, you can probably correct me.
That's why we got Derek here.
Since we just brought up Chloe Zhao, she was connected to a Dracula movie at some point, correct?
Yeah, she was doing something. I will look at this, but I believe you were right.
I heard of Karen Kusama's Dracula. Is that still going on? Is Karen Kusama
There's
still
also
doing
a James Wan Dracula
Is
in
there
the works,
really?
I guess, too.
So in February, they announced that she was going to do a sci-fi Western version.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And
that sounds incredible.
Is
that still potentially a thing? Okay.
This only came out in February, so with Eternals.
I do like the idea of sci-fi Western Dracula. I mean, it sounds like three things that should not go together, but with somebody like her at the helm, I think it's something that could easily be pulled off and look good.
That's easily my most anticipated movie of 2022 and or 2023.
It's going to be better than Cowboys and Aliens, right?
Yeah, it's got to be.
Anything's better than Cowboys and Aliens, except Van Helsing. Yeah, but like the overall look of this movie, that's the stuff that sticks with you. It's not necessarily the story of this movie, because there's not really that big of a story.
It's not very
Vampire
dynamic.
moves in next door. Old man tries to convince everybody vampire moves in next door. Vampire kills a lot of people. They kill vampire. It's Fright Night,
sounds like
but
a
with an
Dracula
old
movie.
dude. It's Fright Night with an old dude. That's what it is, like.
And it's also very anticlimactic when you get to Van Helsing killing Dracula and you don't even see it. That's besides the point.
For a second there, I was about to say, it's like, did I miss something? But no,
he does. All you see is a stake over a casket, and you're like, all right, I guess he's dead. And there's
and you don't even see him actually hammer it in.
You just hear it.
You hear it, and you hear Dracula yell, and then he's like, "Okay, you guys go. I got to take care of some stuff." Like, what are you gonna take care of? You already staked him to the ground. Like,
watch Dracula's Daughter. It picks up right there.
Okay, perfect.
So,
I do need to see that one. That's one of the few ones that I haven't dove into the Dracula series yet in my big Universal Monsters box set. But I'm looking.
In my
forward
opinion,
to it.
it's the best of the Dracula series from Universal.
That's what I've heard, not just from you, but from a lot of people. So I'm very interested to see it.
So Dracula 2000.
Oh man, it's been a while since I've seen that. I don't know if I'm glad we're not doing that one for the podcast. I'll say that much.
Well, you don't want to talk about Gerard Butler for an hour?
Isn't Jonathan Rhys Meyers in that too? Or maybe
Maybe.
not.
Wasn't that serious?
That might have been
Maybe
series.
it was the series.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm confusing a bunch of them. There's
Yeah.
so much Dracula.
Back to Dracula Untold. Let's talk about Luke Evans. I actually like Dracula Untold.
I have not seen that. That's one that I'm going to knock off the list this month because it's Dracula month. Even though we're not talking about it, I'm going to watch it.
So how about Bela Lugosi?
Bela Lugosi. Back to this movie. Yeah, what else do you guys have to throw out there for this movie? I mean, one thing I think that is a great looking shot, and again, this combines the sets, Bela Lugosi's performance, and the few camera movements that we do get in this, is his introduction right away when he's getting out of the casket and you just have the camera moving in on Dracula, and it's just him standing there. Just it's this presence that Lugosi has. It's just this look. That look, like the eyes, it's all in the eyes from Lugosi.
It's one thing about that look that I think is it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. Is that like you've pointed out, this is a very iconic image of him from this Dracula, but to the point where they use it multiple times, to the point where it gets kind of stale towards the end because they use it like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, I agree with that to a point.
Yeah.
Yes, it's overused. But it's also really, really like it's iconic, you know.
Well,
and
that's where I think where they were going with it and whatnot.
Exactly. I mean, when you have something that's gold and you don't have much else, as much as I like this movie, it's very clearly an early 1930s production, right? We've talked about no camera movements. We've talked about no score. What this movie did have was like a trio of honestly great performers. And I even put Edward Van Sloan in that. He's very good in the movie, even though it's not as iconic as the other ones. But like, you know, Helen Chandler, Bela Lugosi, Dwight Frye, all 3 of them just nail it and they knock it out of the park. And those are the moments that really stick with me, are those performances. And then, like you said, the sets, you know, I think we need to talk about Dwight Frye more because he pops up in so many Universal monster movies and he's always incredible in them. Fritz from Frankenstein, he's psychotic in that. Like I love him. I love Dwight Frye to death. And I don't know. We should be talking about Dwight Frye as much as we talk about Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., Claude Rains. Like, yes, they were the titular monsters of these movies, but Dwight Frye has some of the most iconic moments in any of them. You know, he's incredible.
Yeah, I think he should be part of that conversation. I do agree. He is he's not as iconic as Lugosi, Karloff, Chaney Jr., but I think he's integral to all those movies that he's in, and maybe delivers the best performance whenever he shows up too.
Yeah. And that's saying something because he's literally in Frankenstein with Colin Clive and freaking Boris Karloff, who is horror royalty. You know, like Karloff is one of my favorite actors to ever live. And I still think that Dwight Frye gets undersold in that movie, you know?
So much so you named a cat after him.
I did.
That poor cat.
If you listen to our Patreon episode on Shang-Chi, you've met Boris. He's adorable. He's also very loud. And he knocked over my iPad like twice. So
Yay, Boris.
We're training him.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have anything else you want to bring up? Otherwise, I'm going to transition into final thoughts on this
I think we're good with
adaptation of Dracula. I think, again, having watched 3 different versions of this in the last year or so, if you're going to go into this blind or you haven't watched it in a while, go in, find the version with the Philip Glass score, the Lugosi version, and just jump in with that, because I think that's the definitive version of this Dracula, is that movie there. And again, I think it's worth a watch, because if you haven't seen it, it's one of the most iconic horror movies ever made. It has one of the most iconic performances and one of the most underrated ones, with Lugosi being iconic, Dwight Fry being the underrated performance of this movie. It's not going to keep you up at night, probably. Maybe Dwight Fry will.
I was about to say that boat scene.
It's terrifying.
She made
It
a
is
comment
terrifying.
about it. Like Maria made a comment about it. Like, wow, we should not have watched this so close to bed. Because it is. It's terrifying. You open the hole or whatever, and you see him glaring, like not leering up at you, and it's just like,
That's maybe like
that
the
guy's
old-
like off the deep end, man. Like that's a guy who comes into your bedroom at night and strangles you in your sleep. Like
that look on his face is almost like the only, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's not a scary movie. It's early quote unquote horror and whatnot, but to the point where, like, if you took that part out of it, you'd be like, is it really a horror movie anymore? Other than just, hey, there's a weird, creepy dude that moved in next door.
it's a comedy about a perverted old man. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And
he's not perverted. He is very sexy. And Bela Lugosi would have told you that back then as well.
Yeah.
He's a very sexy man.
that's fair. That's fair.
So
Bela Lugosi was a looker. I mean, he's a little past his prime by the time he plays Drac. But, I saw stills from like the stage production in that like featurette on my Blu-ray. And I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, he might seem a little old in the 1931 movie, but that original like theatrical run, he was an attractive man.
yeah, I guess my final thoughts are Bela Lugosi is sexy.
To kind of bounce off what you said, I slightly disagree about the Philip Glass score being the first version you watch. Personally, I would go for the no score, the theatrical, but maybe that's just because I'm a bit of a purist on these things. Like the Philip Glass score was not initially intended for it, and like I said, there are some moments where the score almost undercuts the tension because it's constant. And I think that in order to fully appreciate Dwight Fry's performance, you need those silent moments while he's being Dwight Fry. But I do think that the Philip Glass score is worth watching. I mean, I watched it without the score, and then I watched it with the score literally the next day. And it is like watching two different movies. So it's sort of one of those things where, I don't know. I guess other people don't have a rewatch tolerance like I do. But I had no issue watching them, honestly, like pretty much back to back. So I enjoy the score. I enjoy it just as much without the score. And I think a lot of it is just these performances, the sets, and just the fact that this movie just exists and has brought about this iconic character that has so many interpretations. And I know that this isn't even the first Dracula adaptation. You had Nosferatu from 1922 with Max Schreck, the silent German film, which I have not made it through that whole thing yet. I keep playing it too late at night, and it's a silent movie, so I fall asleep. But it's very effective, what I have seen of it.
You've seen that episode of SpongeBob. You get the gist.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, obviously, I highly recommend Dracula, 1931. Hashtag let's talk about Dwight Fry.
It's a long hashtag.
It is.
Well,
I don't
especially
care.
when the fact that you can't put a fist bump in a hashtag, so you're gonna have to write it out.
Guys, I found out what my first documentary feature is going to be. We need to talk about Dwight.
So I would certainly say to kind of go. I know I'm completely moving on from you.
Yeah, that was my final thought. We need to talk about Dwight.
Yeah, because all of a sudden my brain just went to The Office.
We should have a Dwight Fry month on Backlot. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're like, let's talk about Dwight. I'm like, are we gonna talk about the guy from The
Okay.
Office for?
No, I can't say let's talk about Fry because then you're gonna think Futurama. God.
So to kind of go off of like what Casey said, to being that this is the first time I've watched this and I watched it scoreless, is that you're like start with the scoreless version because that's the definitive in that's how it was intended and whatnot. I don't necessarily believe in that because in the instance of not necessarily recuts of movies, like we've got things like Close Encounters and Apocalypse Now and whatnot, but there are those movies where the score has been changed later on. I think is what is what was intended then just didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because I think of like, Legend. Tangerine Dream score is what is the changing more definitive version of that movie, and that's not what came out originally.
Yeah.
To the point where like I'm watching this, and kind of like what you alluded to is that it's a very semi-stale film that it is a little bit hard to, especially if you're somebody who's never watched this stuff before, maybe isn't as much into horror as like say you two are,
Right.
because you guys are definitely the horror guys compared to me. There's no qualms about that, to the point where I'm watching this, I'm like, it was, at times it's 72 minutes of a little bit hard to get through and whatnot. And I do think that, the score, I think, is what helps move that stuff kind of along.
I would
But
definitely agree with that.
but I mean, I would also say is that, especially if you're into the history of this character and the performances that are here, like you said, the stage production and whatnot, it's a great movie. I would definitely recommend someone watching it. I just think that based on your commentary on said score, that I don't know what it even sounds like. I guess
I mean, it's Philip Glass, so it's good.
I think I would still recommend watching the version that's got the score, because even with what you said takes away from certain parts of it,
Mhm.
I still think everything as a whole, I still think it'd probably be a better movie.
Yeah. Well, here, I'll put it this way.
You had your final thought already.
I know, but I'll put my
His final
perspective
thought.
on watching the non-score version first this way. Would we have fully appreciated the 5-hour Justice League had we not first watched what it was when it was totally butchered? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, whether or not you like Zack Snyder's Justice League versus the Whedon cut, it's two totally different movies because of the changes made, and it makes you kind of love Zack Snyder's more just because the theatrical cut was not up to snuff.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I just want to know how the heck we went from 1931's Dracula
Just
to
follow
Zack
me here.
Snyder's Justice League.
It's making sense in my head.
Not to get on a completely different tangent, but those are the same movies to me.
Oh, well.
Except one is 2 hours shorter.
Did I do that on accident?
You probably did.
Whoops.
Good job.
Yeah,
Let's just get into our last little bit here. If you're
Yeah.
going to pair 1931 Dracula with another movie, what is the movie you're going to pair it with?
Having already seen it back to back with Frankenstein, I think it plays worse when you put Frankenstein next to it, because Frankenstein is, even though it came out in the same year, it's like obviously a more cinematic, better movie. If I were to pair the 1931 Dracula with any other movie, I would go for something classic again. And maybe I would put it with, you know what? I would put it with another movie that is good, maybe not as iconic, and flawed like Dracula is, but overall very enjoyable. I would put it with the 1945 flick Isle of the Dead. I think Isle of the Dead is sort of a vampire movie. They never really say the word vampire in it, but it's very much taking that lore. It's got a killer Boris Karloff performance, and lots of atmosphere, beautiful sets. I think that if you're going to pair 1931's Dracula with a movie, it would be awesome to pair it with something like Isle of the Dead, which to my knowledge is streaming on Shudder for all of you. You should definitely check it out. It's incredible.
What do you think, Casey?
I'm going to go with another Bela Lugosi movie. I'm going to go with White Zombie. I think his performance in that should be up there with what people think of as the Lugosi performance in this movie. I think he is fantastic in that. That movie has plenty of flaws, but I think for the most part holds up really well. He's just as scary as he is here. He has this just on-screen presence in that movie that is it's hard to look away from, because he's so dynamic in that. Yeah,
I mean,
so
he controls an army of zombies.
He
too.
does.
Like, it's a dope movie.
It is a dope movie, and Mr. Robert Zombie even named his band after it.
Yes.
I'm just gonna flip this completely just because I want to. is I'll pair this with Monster Squad just because I want to end on something fun.
That's a good double feature. I love Monster Squad so much.
Yeah.
Again, another movie that why not have a movie as iconic as Monster Squad that gets its own documentary called Wolfman's something about the Nards.
Wolfman's got nards.
Yeah, there you go.
Wolfman's got nards.
He's got nards.
It's also
It's Monster
Frankenstein is it tugs at the heartstrings, but nothing in the Frankenstein movies tug at the heartstrings quite as much as Frankenstein's demise in the Monster Squad.
I just want to hear Bela Lugosi's Dracula yell, "Give me that amulet, you bitch." Just to see what that sounds like.
See? Now you're thinking about this, aren't you?
We're going to do a deep fake Monster Squad. We'll do all the dubbing and everything.
All right, let's do it. All right, so that's it. That's Dracula 1931 here live at SiouxperCon on the final bit of our film festival for the first time here at SiouxperCon. So thank everybody.
Thank you to everybody who came out and supported it, who helped us put it together. Andy Heller, Derek,
Corey,
Maria. There's so many people that really did a lot to help pull this thing off, and we appreciate anybody who came to a screening.
All the filmmakers.
All the filmmakers for sure. Everybody. Yeah. I mean, if you were a part of this in any way, just know we are very, very effing grateful to it, because it was, I don't know about you guys, but this weekend was kind of a dream come true for me. So yeah, it was dope.
Do it all again next year.
Hell yeah.
Yes. So with that, again, you guys know where you can find us online. You can find us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Backlot 605, and then Letterboxd HQ, Backlot 605.
You can find us on Apple, Stitcher, Google Play, and 3 other logos, and then YouTube. Pretty much anywhere you get podcasts, you can find the Backlot 605 podcast. So make sure to subscribe if you like all things movies.
And don't forget to come check us out on Patreon.
Yeah. See, this is why we should have sat in a different order.
He starts talking about my social links. I'm like, that's my job.
We'll figure it out next time.
Yeah.
So socials, subscribe, Patreon. That's the gist. All at Backlot 605.
You can find us anywhere.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Just do a Google search. So again, for SiouxperCon, not online. I for some reason thought we were going to be SiouxperCon online. SiouxperCon Heroes Homecoming 2021. This has been Backlot 605. For Brian Mensing, Sam Lenz, I'm Casey Kelderman. Thank you all for listening, and we'll check you out next time on the Backlot of South Dakota.
Bye-bye.